Muslim man bullied at airport, then returns as the owner of the airline. How will this story escalate? To find out, watch the video to the end. But first, please subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications to get more stories like this. The airport buzzed with its usual chaos. Tired travelers dragging suitcases, families juggling children and passports, business people hunched over laptops while sipping overpriced coffee. Announcements echoed across the terminal, calling for passengers to report to gates or board final flights. Amid the commotion, a man walked calmly through the crowd, his beige thobe flowing just above his polished shoes. He carried himself with quiet confidence, one hand adjusting the strap of the leather satchel slung over his shoulder. His neatly trimmed beard framed his strong jawline, and his kufi, a simple white cap, sat perfectly atop his head. His name was Yasin. Yasin exhaled slowly as he glanced around the terminal, scanning the lines at security and ticket counters. To him, airports were just checkpoints, nothing more than temporary spaces. He had spent years traveling the world for work, building a reputation as a calm, collected leader who never let frustration show. But today was different. As he approached the security line, a creeping unease began to settle in his chest. It wasn't his first time traveling through this airport, and he knew that the stares would come. They always did. People would glance at him, their gazes lingering longer than necessary, their expressions a mix of suspicion and discomfort. He could feel it even now, a cluster of people in line darting quick looks in his direction before turning away, pretending not to stare. Yasin tightened his grip on the strap of his bag. Stay calm, he told himself. You've been through this before. The line moved slowly as passengers passed through metal detectors and agents inspected carry-ons. Just as Yasin stepped forward to approach the checkpoint, a sharp voice called out, shattering the rhythm of the line. Sir? Yasin froze, his heart skipping. The voice was loud, authoritative, and unmistakably directed at him. Turning slowly, he found a man in a navy suit standing off to the side. The man's shirt collar strained against his thick neck, and his name badge identified him as Logan. Step aside for additional screening, Logan barked, gesturing sharply. Yasin blinked, taken aback. Excuse me? You heard me, Logan said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Step aside. Now. Yasin looked around. No one else in the line had been pulled out. Passengers clutched their belongings tighter, their gazes darting back and forth between Logan and Yasin. Some whispered to each other, though Yasin couldn't hear what they were saying. Others simply turned away, eager to avoid being part of whatever was unfolding. I've already removed my jacket and shoes, Yasin said, keeping his voice calm but firm. Is there a reason you're singling me out? Logan's expression hardened as he stepped closer, his posture towering. Are you questioning protocol? Yasin's jaw tightened. No. I'm asking a simple question. Logan sneered, pointing at Yasin's bag. Empty the contents. Let's go. Yasin glanced down at his satchel, his mind racing. He had nothing to hide, of course, but the humiliation of the moment felt heavier than the bag itself. Slowly, he stepped aside, unzipping the satchel with deliberate care as Logan loomed over him. The line continued moving, passengers shooting uneasy glances as they passed. A mother clutched her child's hand a little tighter, steering them away. A businessman with noise-canceling headphones glanced once, then quickly averted his gaze as if looking too long might implicate him. Yasin's hands trembled faintly as he removed a neatly folded tablet, a notebook, and a few pens from his bag, placing them on the inspection table. Logan picked up the tablet, inspecting it with exaggerated scrutiny before dropping it carelessly back onto the table. What's this? Logan snapped, holding up the notebook. A notebook, Yasin replied evenly. Logan flipped through the pages as if expecting to find something incriminating, some hidden plot scribbled between meeting notes and grocery lists. Finding nothing, he tossed the notebook down with a scoff. Yasin clenched his fists, feeling his composure slipping. This is unnecessary, he said quietly, trying to keep his tone measured. You think you know better than me how to do my job? Logan growled, stepping even closer. No, Yasin replied, meeting his glare head-on. But I know this isn't about your job. Logan's face flushed red, his expression twisting with anger. Watch your tone, sir, he hissed. You're lucky we're letting you through it all. That was it. The words struck Yasin like a slap to the face, cutting through his resolve. Around them, the crowd had grown even quieter, people standing just far enough away to avoid being part of the scene, but not so far that they couldn't watch. Yasin looked Logan in the eye, his voice calm but unshakable. I've done nothing wrong, he said. I am here to board my flight, just like everyone else. Yeah? Logan sneered, gesturing to Yassine's attire. Well, maybe next time don't look so suspicious. A collective gasp rippled through the small crowd. Yassine's heart dropped. For a moment, he forgot how to breathe, the words echoing in his mind. Don't look so suspicious. Yassine straightened his shoulders, forcing himself to stand taller despite the humiliation twisting inside him. You've gone too far, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Logan smirked as if he had already won. Move along, he said, pointing toward the security gate. Yassine looked at him for a long moment, then slowly gathered his belongings. He moved methodically, carefully placing the tablet and notebook back into his bag as the crowd watched. His hands were steady now, his anger coiled tightly inside him like a spring. As he slung the bag over his shoulder, he turned to Logan one last time. You may think you have power, Yassine said quietly, but power isn't how you treat the people beneath you. It's how you lift them up. Logan's smirk faltered. For a brief second, Yassine saw the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes, but it was gone as quickly as it came. Without another word, Yassine turned and walked toward the gate, his head held high. The crowd parted for him like water, people stepping back as he passed. A few looked at him apologetically as if to say they were sorry for not stepping in, but their silence still spoke louder. As Yassine approached his gate, his calm exterior began to crack. He sat heavily in a chair near the window, resting his bag on the floor beside him. Outside, planes taxied across the runway, their engines roaring faintly through the glass. He rubbed his hands together, staring at his reflection in the window. No matter how calm he tried to be, the sting of Logan's words lingered. Don't look so suspicious. He'd heard words like that before. Whispers in stores. Comments under breaths. Looks that lingered just a little too long. It didn't matter who he was, how hard he'd worked, or how far he'd come. People like Logan still saw him as less than. They'll never change, he thought bitterly. But even as the anger burned in his chest, another thought surfaced. One that drowned out the bitterness. This isn't over. He didn't know how yet, but Logan's cruelty wouldn't be the end of this story. Not for him, and not for anyone else who had ever felt invisible in their own skin. The airport terminal hummed with muted conversations and rolling suitcases, but Yassine's mind was caught in a whirlwind of noise he couldn't shake. As he sat quietly in the departure lounge, the encounter with Logan replayed in his head on a loop, like a movie scene stuck on repeat. Each word, each sneer, felt etched into his skin. He adjusted his kufi, drawing in a slow breath. People continued to glance at him, not overtly but with that same lingering suspicion. He could feel it. Their eyes skimmed over him like they were searching for something to justify Logan's behavior. Yassine's reflection in the window met his gaze, calm, strong and composed, but inside, his patience trembled on a knife's edge. Unbelievable. The voice startled him. Turning to his left, Yassine saw a man sitting a few chairs away. He wore a business suit and glasses that sat low on his nose. His brow furrowed as he shook his head, arms crossed over his chest. Excuse me? Yassine said carefully. The man looked up, clearly angry though not at Yassine. I saw what happened back there. That security guy was completely out of line. Yassine studied him for a moment, surprised. You saw it? Yeah, and so did everyone else. The man's voice dropped, tinged with shame. But no one stepped in. Not even me. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. I told myself it wasn't my place, but it's people like him who make airports unbearable. Yassine tilted his head slightly. Why didn't you say something? The man's gaze flickered, guilt clouding his face. I don't know. Maybe because I didn't want to cause a scene. Yassine nodded slowly. You didn't want to cause a scene. And what about him? Wasn't that a scene? The man exhaled sharply, clearly wrestling with the truth in Yassine's words. You're right, he admitted softly. I'm sorry you had to deal with that. Yassine offered a faint smile, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. Thank you. It's not about me. It's about what happens when people stay silent. The man nodded, falling quiet as Yassine turned back to the window. Outside, the sun was beginning to set, streaking the sky with orange and purple hues. The warmth of the light contrasted sharply with the coldness of the moment that still hung over him. As the time to board the flight approached, Yassine rose from his seat and joined the line near the gate. Around him, passengers shuffled forward, clutching their boarding passes. But as he moved toward the front, a voice called out, one he recognized instantly. Hey, you again? Yassine turned slowly, his stomach sinking. Logan was standing at the gate, arms crossed and a smug grin plastered across his face. How was he here? Yassine's flight had already begun boarding, yet somehow Logan had appeared again, like a shadow he couldn't escape. "I thought you were done harassing me," Yassine said evenly, forcing calm into his voice. Logan's grin widened. "Just making sure you're not causing any trouble?" His eyes darted deliberately to Yassine's kufi and traditional attire, his meaning clear. Yassine felt heat rise in his chest, but he refused to let it show. "The only trouble here is you," he replied quietly. "I suggest you let me board my flight." Logan stepped forward, his towering figure trying to intimidate. Passengers in line began whispering, the tension spreading like ripples in water. "Logan!" The shout came from a tall woman in a crisp navy uniform, clearly a senior airport official. She marched toward the gate with sharp, deliberate strides, her expression set in stone. "What are you doing?" Logan hesitated, looking startled. "Ma'am, I was just causing a problem," she snapped, cutting him off. Her voice was firm, brooking no argument. "I've received several complaints about you harassing passengers today. This ends now." The crowd murmured louder, watching the confrontation unfold. Logan's face turned red, his mouth opening and closing like he couldn't find the words. Yassine stood perfectly still, watching quietly as the power dynamic shifted. The woman turned to Yassine, her expression softening. "I'm so sorry for this, sir," she said. "Please, go ahead and board your flight." Yassine nodded politely. "Thank you." Logan stood frozen as Yassine handed his boarding pass to the gate agent and moved forward. He felt the weight of dozens of eyes on him, some curious, others apologetic. And as he stepped onto the jet bridge, Yassine glanced back one last time. Logan's smirk was gone. For the first time he looked small, like the bully who'd finally been caught. The flight itself passed in a blur. Yassine sat quietly in his seat, his notebook open on the tray table. But no matter how hard he tried to focus on the words in front of him, his mind wandered back to the day's events. He thought of Logan's face, sneering, arrogant, but ultimately afraid. He thought of the passengers who had watched but done nothing, their silence complicit in the humiliation he'd endured. And he thought of the man at the gate, the one who had admitted he hadn't spoken up because he didn't want to cause a scene. How many people have stayed silent while others suffer? Yassine's fingers hovered over the notebook as a thought took hold. He wrote 2 words at the top of the page, pressing the pen firmly to the paper. Never again. Those words sat like an anchor in his chest. Yassine had spent his life building his career, traveling to boardrooms and conferences, growing a reputation as a man who could lead without raising his voice. He believed in dignity and strength through composure. But today, for the first time, he realized that dignity also meant knowing when to act. This wasn't just about him. 2 weeks later, Logan's world came crashing down. The airport staff gathered in the employee lounge, whispering as an emergency meeting was called. Logan sat in a corner, slouched in his seat, trying to look indifferent. But the tension in the room was palpable. The senior official, the same woman who had intervened at the gate, stood at the front, her face grim. "We've received a formal complaint about an incident 2 weeks ago involving one of our employees," she began. "The passenger involved is a highly respected figure, someone who deserves far better than the treatment he received." Logan's face paled. Whispers rippled through the room as employees turned to look at him. Effective immediately, the woman continued, "Mr. Logan is suspended pending a full investigation." Logan shot up from his seat, his voice cracking. "You can't be serious." The woman's eyes narrowed. "Serious doesn't begin to cover it. You've humiliated this company and violated the trust we place in our staff. Your actions have consequences." Logan opened his mouth to argue, but no one was listening anymore. He sank back into his chair, his face red with humiliation. Meanwhile, at the far end of the terminal, airport employees whispered about another rumor, one that had spread like wildfire over the past 48 hours. "Did you hear?" someone murmured to a coworker. "The man Logan harassed owns part of the airline now." "No way," the coworker replied, eyes wide. "Seriously?" "Yeah," the first voice confirmed. "Apparently he's been in talks for months and now he's finalizing the deal." Logan messed with the wrong person. They exchanged stunned glances, their voices dropping as passengers hurried past. At a sleek conference table in a high-rise boardroom, Yassine sat across from a group of executives. The CEO of the airline smiled nervously as he extended a hand. "Mr. Yassine, it's a pleasure to finalize this agreement," the CEO said. "We're thrilled to have you as part of our team." Yassine shook his hand firmly, his expression calm but resolute. "I'm not here for the profits," he said quietly. "I'm here to change things." The executives glanced at one another, uncertain. But Yassine leaned back in his chair, his gaze steady. People deserve dignity, he continued. Airports are supposed to bring people together, not tear them apart. They couldn't argue with that. 2 weeks had passed since Logan's aggressive confrontation with Yassine, and while the airport buzzed with its usual frantic energy, something had changed. Rumors swirled among employees in hushed tones, gathering steam like a brewing storm. Logan had been suspended indefinitely pending an investigation, and whispers of a new, powerful investor acquiring a stake in the airline filled the break rooms and hallways. Details were scarce, but one thing was certain. Someone important had been watching that day at the security gate. The atmosphere was tense. Staff members who had once ignored Logan's arrogance now avoided him entirely, as if his disgrace might rub off on them. And yet, no one knew the full story. Who was the passenger Logan had humiliated? What did his silence mean? The truth would hit them like a lightning bolt soon enough. Yassine stepped off a private jet early that morning, the hum of engines behind him. He walked across the tarmac with his usual calm, a stark contrast to the flurry of airport workers bustling around him. Gone was the quiet passenger of 2 weeks prior. Today Yassine moved with purpose, a man of influence returning to settle unfinished business. He wore a tailored suit in deep navy blue, the sharp cut of the fabric framing his broad shoulders. The pristine white of his shirt collar peeked out just above his thobe, giving him an air of elegance that made him stand out even among executives. His kufi remained perfectly placed, an unmistakable part of who he was. As he entered the main terminal through a private access gate, Yassine carried no trace of the man Logan had humiliated. The fear, the unease, it was all gone. He exuded nothing but confidence. Inside the airport, Logan sat slumped in a chair at the far end of the security checkpoint, arms crossed, face hardened. Though officially suspended, he had been called back to a final meeting with the airport's management team. The nature of the meeting wasn't clear, but Logan had his suspicions. "They can't fire me," he muttered to himself under his breath, glaring at the people walking by. "I was doing my job." In truth, Logan had spent the last 2 weeks nursing his pride, convinced that his actions had been justified. To him, Yassine had been suspicious. That was all the excuse he needed. The idea that he might face real consequences seemed ridiculous. But as Logan sat there, watching the steady stream of travelers shuffle through the terminal, he noticed something strange. People, employees, security guards, even managers, were whispering, their eyes darting toward the far end of the terminal. Logan followed their stares. And then he saw him. Yassine. Except this wasn't the same man Logan had humiliated. This Yassine moved through the terminal surrounded by 3 suited executives, their movements hurried and deferential as they flanked him. People stepped aside as Yassine passed, some whispering, others simply staring. Logan's brow furrowed, confusion twisting his features. "What the?" he muttered. A security guard near Logan leaned over and whispered in disbelief. "That's the new guy. The one buying into the airline." Logan's stomach dropped. "What? You didn't hear?" the guard said, his voice hushed. "That's Yassine Al-Farouk, CEO of Al-Farouk Enterprises. He's worth billions. Word is he's finalizing his acquisition today. The man owns hotels, airlines, you name it. Half the staff's been talking about it all morning." Logan's face went pale, sweat beading on his forehead. "No. That can't be him." But even as he said it, he knew it was true. Logan shot up from his chair, his pulse pounding. He watched as Yassine approached the center of the terminal, where a makeshift press setup had been constructed. A podium, microphones, and cameras. A crowd was gathering, their curiosity mounting as word spread like wildfire. Logan pushed through the growing group of onlookers, his heart thundering in his chest. "This can't be happening. Not to me." The makeshift press conference area hummed with nervous energy as airline executives and staff stood at the edges, waiting. Yassine stepped up to the podium with calm, measured steps, his hands resting lightly on either side. The cameras trained on him, flashes from photographers catching the faint smile on his face. He scanned the crowd for a brief moment before speaking. His voice was steady, clear, and carried across the terminal like a soft command. "Good afternoon, everyone." The crowd quieted immediately. Even Logan, now standing off to the side, fell silent, though his hands balled into fists at his sides. "As many of you have heard, today marks an important moment for this airport and this airline," Yassine began. "My name is Yassine Al-Farouk, CEO of Al-Farouk Enterprises. Over the past several months, I have been in talks to finalize a majority investment in this airline. As of this morning, I am proud to announce that the deal is complete." A ripple of applause spread through the room as airline staff exchanged astonished looks. Yassine's name was one that carried weight. a name associated with excellence, success, and leadership on a global scale. Yassine paused, letting the murmurs settle. His eyes scanned the faces in the crowd, his calm gaze stopping briefly on Logan, who had turned ghostly pale. "But I want to share why this investment matters to me," Yassine continued. "2 weeks ago, I came through this airport as just another traveler. No titles, no entourage. And during my time here, I experienced something that I've spent my life working to fight. Discrimination." The room fell deathly quiet. Cameras zoomed in on Yassine's face, capturing every word. "A man who should have been upholding safety and dignity instead used his position to humiliate me," Yassine said, his voice unwavering. "Not because of what I had done but because of how I looked. Because of who I am." A hush fell over the crowd. Logan shrank back slightly, his gaze darting nervously. People near him stepped away, their judgment palpable. "I could have walked away," Yassine said. "I could have done what I've done so many times before, ignored it, told myself it didn't matter. But that's not the world I want to live in. I believe airports, airlines, and businesses like this one should bring people together. They should stand as places of trust, dignity, and respect, regardless of where someone comes from, what they wear, or how they look." The crowd began to murmur in agreement, several people nodding as Yassine's words hit their mark. "That is why I'm here," Yassine concluded, his voice firm. "Not to punish but to change. I will not tolerate discrimination in any form, whether it's here in this airport, on this airline, or anywhere else my leadership reaches. And let this serve as a message: treat people with respect. It costs you nothing but means everything." Applause erupted. Staff members clapped loudly, some cheering, while others exchanged looks of admiration. Even passengers who had stopped to listen joined in, their hands coming together with genuine enthusiasm. Logan stared at Yassine, frozen in place as the truth of the moment crashed over him like a wave. The man he had belittled, the man he had treated like nothing, was now the owner of the airline. And in that moment, Logan understood the full weight of his actions. As the applause died down, Yassine stepped away from the podium, greeted warmly by airline executives who shook his hand. The crowd slowly began to disperse, though conversations buzzed with excitement and awe. Yassine made his way through the terminal, calm and collected as always. When he passed Logan, he stopped. Logan flinched as Yassine turned to look at him. For a long moment, they stood in silence, Logan's face burning with shame. "I told you," Yassine said softly, his voice carrying no anger, only quiet dignity. "Power isn't how you treat people beneath you, it's how you lift them up." Logan said nothing. His throat bobbed as he swallowed, unable to meet Yassine's gaze. Yassine offered him a final steady look before walking away, leaving Logan standing there, small, insignificant, and utterly alone. By the time Yassine reached the exit, employees and passengers alike stopped him to offer their thanks and praise. Some shook his hand, others simply smiled, but all of them looked at him with newfound respect. For Yassine, the victory wasn't in titles or applause. It was in knowing that something had shifted, that he had turned humiliation into empowerment, not just for himself, but for anyone who had ever been made to feel invisible. And as he stepped out into the evening light, Yassine smiled. This was just the beginning. Logan sat in the back of the employee lounge, his face pale and fingers twitching as he stared blankly at his phone. The news had exploded across every social media platform, local channel, and global outlet. Videos of Yassine's speech at the airport podium had gone viral, racking up millions of views in a matter of hours. CEO shuts down airport discrimination, delivers a powerful message on respect. Billionaire business leader takes a stand after being humiliated at security. Logan's blunder costs him more than he expected. The comments underneath were ruthless. "I can't believe people like Logan still exist in this day and age. Props to Yassine for handling this with class. True leadership. Fire Logan immediately. This man has no business working with the public." Logan scrolled furiously, sweat prickling the back of his neck. Each headline, each comment made his throat tighten further, like a noose pulling tighter with every tap of his screen. He knew he'd crossed the line. He'd been told countless times that his brash, arrogant demeanor would get him in trouble. But he never thought it would end like this. "Logan." The sharp voice of the senior airport manager jolted him upright. He glanced toward the doorway where the woman, Ms. Donovan, stood with her arms crossed, her expression as icy as ever. "Office. Now." Logan's legs felt like concrete as he rose from his chair and followed her down the hallway. The walls felt narrower than usual, the air thick with dread. Logan didn't need to be told what this meeting was about. He could already see the writing on the wall. Inside Ms. Donovan's office sat two executives from the airline's corporate division. They were middle-aged men in dark suits, their polished appearances cold and professional. Logan swallowed hard as he sat across from them, the weight of their stares bearing down on him. "Mr. Logan," one of the executives began, folding his hands on the desk. "You are aware of the events that transpired 2 weeks ago, correct?" Logan's mouth felt dry. "Yes, sir." "Good. Then I don't need to explain how damaging your actions have been, not just to the passenger involved, but to the reputation of this airport and our airline," the executive continued. "Your behavior was unacceptable, discriminatory, and grossly unprofessional." Logan opened his mouth to defend himself, but Ms. Donovan's sharp glare silenced him instantly. "We have reviewed the incident thoroughly," the other executive said, his voice firm. "The footage, witness statements, and your disciplinary record leave us no choice." Logan felt the floor drop beneath him. "Effective immediately, you are terminated from your position," the executive finished. "Your access to airport property has been revoked." Logan's hands balled into fists. "You can't." "We can," Ms. Donovan said coldly. "And we are. Security will escort you out." Logan's face turned crimson, anger and shame warring in his chest. He shot to his feet, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "This is ridiculous," he snapped. "I was doing my job." "No," Ms. Donovan corrected, her voice low and icy. "You were abusing your power. And that's why you're done here." Logan stood frozen, his chest rising and falling rapidly as the reality of the moment hit him. Security personnel entered the office, gesturing for him to leave. Shoulders slumped, Logan turned and walked out, his footsteps heavy as the walls seemed to close in around him. News of Logan's firing spread quickly throughout the airport staff. Some employees expressed surprise, while others exchanged knowing looks. Most had seen Logan's behavior for years and understood it had been a long time coming. But amid the fallout, something far more significant was happening. Yassine wasn't done. Days after the press conference, Yassine returned to the airport, this time for a private meeting with senior airline staff, airport management, and key employees. A large conference room had been reserved for the occasion, the long table lined with chairs occupied by nervous executives and curious managers. Yassine entered the room with his usual calm presence, his movements deliberate and his expression unreadable. "Thank you all for meeting with me today," Yassine began, standing at the head of the table. "I believe there is important work to be done, and I intend to make that clear." The room fell silent, everyone hanging on his every word. "2 weeks ago, I experienced firsthand what happens when power is abused," Yassine continued, his voice steady. "It was not the first time I faced such treatment, but I intend to make sure it is the last, for me and for anyone else who walks through these doors." A few executives exchanged uneasy glances, but Yassine's gaze remained fixed. "This isn't just about one incident," Yassine said. "It's about the culture we create in our airports, our airlines, and our businesses. Discrimination, whether blatant or subtle, has no place here." Ms. Donovan, seated near the middle of the table, nodded in agreement, her sharp expression now softened with respect. "To that end," Yassine continued, "I am implementing mandatory sensitivity and diversity training for all employees, from executives to frontline staff. This will not be optional." One of the executives cleared his throat. "That's a significant investment, Mr. Al-Farouk. Are you certain it's necessary?" Yassine's gaze snapped to him, calm but unyielding. "Yes," he said simply. "It's not just necessary, it's long overdue." The executive looked away, clearly chastised. Yassine turned back to the room. "Leadership is not about enforcing power. It's about lifting people up and fostering respect. If we fail at that, we fail at everything." For a long moment, no one spoke. The weight of Yassine's words settled over the room like a blanket, leaving everyone to reflect on their roles and what had happened. "Thank you for your time," Yassine concluded, his voice softer now. "I trust that each of you will take this as seriously as I do." With that, he turned and left the room, his footsteps echoing faintly as the door closed behind him. Word of Yassine's initiative spread quickly throughout the airport. Employees whispered about the new diversity training, some with excitement, others with nervous curiosity. Posters promoting inclusivity and respect appeared in break rooms and hallways, carrying the slogan, "Dignity for all." Some rolled their eyes at first, dismissing it as corporate jargon. But as Yassine's message took root, attitudes began to shift. Conversations among staff members became more thoughtful. Managers checked in on their teams, ensuring everyone felt seen and valued. Employees who had once stayed silent began speaking up when they saw something wrong. And for the first time in a long time, the airport began to feel different, warmer, kinder, safer. Meanwhile, Yassine continued to make quiet waves behind the scenes. He visited community centers, supporting programs for underserved travelers and advocating for equitable policies. He partnered with nonprofits focused on education, diversity, and cultural awareness, ensuring that his influence reached far beyond the airport walls. Reporters clamored for interviews, eager to capture his story. Yassine agreed to a few, sharing his experience and emphasizing the need for change. "I want my story to inspire action," he said during one televised interview. "We all have a responsibility to treat others with respect, no matter where they come from or how they look. It's not just about me, it's about all of us." The interview went viral, sparking conversations across the globe. Travelers shared their own stories of discrimination and kindness, some recounting moments where strangers had stood up for them when no one else would. In the midst of it all, Yassine remained grounded. He hadn't sought attention or applause, only change. And slowly but surely, that change was happening. 2 weeks later, Yassine found himself walking through the same airport terminal where it had all begun. He passed through the security checkpoint without issue, the agents polite and professional as they waved him through. Some recognized him immediately, their faces lighting up with smiles of genuine admiration. "Good morning, Mr. Al-Farouk," one guard said. "Safe travels." "Thank you," Yassine replied warmly, his voice calm as ever. As he moved through the terminal, travelers whispered to one another, pointing subtly in his direction. But this time, their stares weren't filled with suspicion or judgment, they were filled with respect. A young man approached Yassine hesitantly, clutching a backpack and looking nervous. "Excuse me, sir," he said softly. "I just wanted to say, what you did here means a lot. It gives me hope." Yassine smiled gently, clapping the young man on the shoulder. "Never let anyone make you feel small," he said. "You belong here just like everyone else." The young man beamed, nodding gratefully before walking away. Yassine turned and gazed out across the bustling terminal. The airport was the same, but somehow everything felt different. And that was enough. Yassine stood in the first-class lounge of the airport, sipping a small cup of mint tea. The hum of travelers around him felt distant, his thoughts wandering as he gazed at the runway through the glass. Planes took off and landed against the backdrop of a sun-soaked sky, their silhouettes carving paths into the endless blue. It was a quiet moment, the kind Yassine cherished. But beneath the calm, a quiet satisfaction hummed in his chest. A lot had changed in just a few weeks. Downstairs, the airport bustled with its usual energy. Travelers hurried to gates, families juggled strollers and luggage, and businesspeople navigated calls with Bluetooth earpieces lodged firmly in place. Yet those who worked here knew something was different now. It wasn't just the posters on the walls promoting equality or the new Dignity for Alt initiative rolled out under Yassine's leadership. It was in the way the staff carried themselves, the way they interacted with passengers, each other, and even strangers. Logan's firing had become a lesson, a reminder that abuse of power wouldn't go unchecked. People who had once stayed silent when witnessing mistreatment now felt empowered to speak up, to do something. The culture at the airport had shifted inch by inch until it became a place where people were seen for who they were, not what they looked like. In a small cafe near Gate 12, 2 employees whispered to each other as they scanned their surroundings. "Did you hear he's here today?" one of them murmured excitedly. The other nodded. "Yeah, Yassine Al-Farouk. They say he's flying out later this afternoon." "Imagine meeting him," the first said, shaking her head. "I wouldn't even know what to say. I'd probably just thank him for what he's done." Their conversation drifted off as a group of passengers shuffled into line for coffee, but their words hung in the air like a shared thought. Even those who hadn't personally met Yassine felt his impact. He had turned humiliation into hope and planted seeds of change that would grow long after he was gone. At the far end of the terminal, a new hire named Jamal adjusted his tie nervously as he approached the security checkpoint. It was his first day on the job as a junior security officer, and the weight of responsibility sat heavy on his shoulders. Jamal had grown up hearing stories from his family, stories about prejudice, about being treated as less than. And now here he was working in an airport where one man's stand had reshaped everything. As he took his position, Jamal glanced up at the glass wall near the entrance. A new plaque had been installed there only days earlier. It was small, made of polished silver, and featured an engraved quote beneath the airport's logo. "Treat others with dignity even when no one is watching. Yassine Al-Farouk." Jamal smiled faintly. Those words felt like a compass. As a passenger stepped forward, Jamal straightened his shoulders. "Good morning, ma'am," he said with a polite smile. Hope you have a smooth flight today. The woman looked pleasantly surprised. Thank you, young man. That's very kind of you. Meanwhile, Yassine made his way toward the departure gate, his steps measured, his expression serene. People turned to watch him as he passed, not out of suspicion this time but out of respect. They whispered to one another, pointing subtly and sharing what they knew of his story. A man who had been humiliated 2 weeks ago now walked these halls as a figure of change. Near gate 18 a familiar voice called out, "Mr. Al-Farouk?" Yassine turned to see Ms. Donovan approaching him, her expression one of warmth and quiet pride. "I just wanted to say," she began, pausing briefly to gather her thoughts, "thank you for what you've done here. It's already made a difference." Yassine smiled gently, inclining his head. "Thank you, Ms. Donovan. But the real change happens when people like you take a stand. You're the reason this airport will continue to move forward." Ms. Donovan nodded, clearly moved by his words. "Safe travels, Mr. Al-Farouk. I hope we'll see you again soon." "Perhaps," Yassine said, his voice soft. "This place is special now." With that, he turned and continued walking, the quiet applause of onlookers echoing faintly behind him. Outside, Logan sat slumped on a bench just beyond the terminal doors. His security uniform was gone, replaced by a simple jacket and jeans. He stared at the ground, head hung low, as travelers bustled past without giving him a second glance. 2 weeks had been enough to unravel everything. The job he'd once held with arrogant pride had been stripped from him, his reputation reduced to nothing but whispers of disgrace. He had become invisible, an afterthought in the place where he used to loom over others like a storm cloud. A pair of polished shoes stopped in front of him, breaking his reverie. Logan looked up slowly, squinting against the afternoon sunlight. Yassine stood there, his expression unreadable. For a long moment neither of them spoke. The silence stretched between them, thick with words unspoken. Finally Yassine broke it. "Logan?" Logan flinched at the sound of his name, shame pooling in his chest. "What do you want?" he muttered, his voice hollow. Yassine regarded him carefully, his calm presence an unshakable contrast to Logan's disheveled form. "I want you to understand something," he said quietly. Logan scoffed bitterly. "I get it. I messed up. You don't have to rub it in." "I'm not here to rub anything in," Yassine replied evenly. "I'm here to remind you that it's never too late to change." Logan looked up sharply, his brow furrowing. "What?" Yassine stepped closer, his voice steady and firm. "You let your bias blind you to the truth. But I don't believe people are incapable of growth. What matters now is what you choose to do with the time you've been given." Logan stared at him, the weight of the words settling in his chest. Yassine didn't stay long. He simply turned and walked away, leaving Logan to sit in silence. For the first time in weeks, Logan didn't feel anger or bitterness. He just felt empty. And as Yassine disappeared into the terminal, Logan let out a long breath. Maybe it wasn't too late. Yassine boarded his flight, settling into his seat near the window. Outside, the sun hung low on the horizon, casting a golden glow across the runway. He looked out the window, a small smile tugging at the corners of his lips. Change didn't happen overnight, he knew that better than anyone. But this airport, these people, something had shifted. And as long as people continued to stand up for what was right, that change would grow. As the engines roared to life and the plane began to taxi, Yassine leaned back in his seat, closing his eyes. This wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning.